by many people, and it's just not, there aren't many people who do what I do, unfortunately. And I think a lot of treatment centers recognize the need for it now, but there's still just, most treatment centers
Mhm.
do not have robust family recovery programs. So if you, let's say you have an intervention and your child goes to treatment, or however they end up in a treatment program, and there's a whole list of things there. Part of the coaching is trying to help parents pick out a good program. Most of the time, I recommend a much longer. There are 30-day programs, but there's so many different
Mhm.
things to look at. There aren't a lot of good Christian programs that have a clinical component to them. So finding a
Mhm.
good Christian program that has a psychiatrist on staff and has medical staff and has their own detox and all of that combined, it is really difficult.
What are some, I guess, some first steps that families can take to recover and heal together?
Let's just say their child goes to treatment. That's the perfect time. And we don't have to wait until they get there. But
Mhm.
if they are in treatment, the parents, I would start with the parents. The parents could work with a family recovery coach. And it's really about learning to manage their emotions, because what happens is
Mhm.
the addicted individual is very good at it's not the person. Your child is in there, right? But they're battling this
Mhm.
addiction, and the addiction does not want to let go. And so it's very manipulative. And you can imagine that if the parents do not have really, really good communication skills, if they do not have emotional management under control, then their child can easily manipulate them into giving them the things that they want. So it's usually not recommended, or at least I usually do not recommend, that the child move back in with the parents after treatment. The goal is for them to be able to transition into independent adult living as they go through this process, recovery. Usually the family just has not had enough time to get all of the education and and to be able to build up, to become resilient enough to not cave in when their child moves back in. A lot of times they will, even in their communications, they may say something that will end up
Mhm.
triggering their child and cause them to feel stress and then want to go back out and use again. So I think it's important that they become resilient, that they get the education that they need, and that's where a family recovery coach can come in, and with siblings as well, and other family members.
Okay, so when you first heard about your son Chase's addiction, you panicked and you said that you made a lot of parenting mistakes. Can you share with our community what you would like them to learn from your mistakes so that they don't make the same?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, if you suspect they're using drugs or alcohol, before you even get to that point, hopefully, try to set up a relationship where they feel comfortable coming to you and talking to you about problems. Um, you know, my wife, Chase would go to my wife with things, and I would say, and then she would tell me, and I would say, well, why didn't he come to me? Well, he didn't feel safe coming to me because I was the disciplinarian, and so
Mhm.
he would go to her. And if he would have, I would have been a lot more, I don't know, maybe I would have been kind of hard. I have the military background and everything, but I have a heart, I'm very compassionate, and there's a side of me that would have welcomed, his desire to reach out and ask questions. I have a really good relationship with our younger son now. He's 25, and he shares things with me all the time and asks me questions about things. But that's one of the things. I think the other thing is that if you discover that they're using drugs, or you suspect, let's just go with that first, you suspect, don't spy on them to try to find out, because I think we want to know for sure, and I would say, to respect their privacy. Yes, if they're a teenager, you do have a right to, they're living in your house. You do have the right to say, okay, these are the boundaries. I'm going to go into your room. I'm going to
Mhm.
search. I'm going to, if you're using the phone and I'm paying for it, then there some of the rules are, I can go into your phone anytime I want to and look. Those, but you really need to set those ground rules up in advance. But
Mhm.
once they're an adult, that changes a little bit. I would say don't panic and have a knee-jerk reaction where you start yelling at them. That was probably one of the biggest things I wanted to get across here, because then the lines of communication shut down, and then you really don't know what's going on. They'll just cut you
Mhm.
off altogether. If they do go to treatment, don't let them come move back into your house. That was another big mistake that I made. But one of the best things that I did was having an intervention for Chase, because it broke the cycle that we were in, and
Mhm.
it was a pattern interrupt that allowed him to get into treatment and start getting better.
You spoke about healthy boundaries and kind of about enabling. How can a parent begin to identify when they're helping their child as opposed to enabling their child when they're going through something like this?
Think of it like cheerleading versus caretaking, or caretaking versus
Mm.
cheerleading. If you have a younger child, you're their caretaker. If you're dealing with an adult child, you should not be doing anything for them that they could be and should be doing for themselves. If especially once they have a drug or alcohol problem. If you're giving them money, if they're living in your house and they're capable or they're old enough that they should be able to have a job and have their own place. Now, I know a lot of things changed with COVID, and I know it's
Mhm.
the way. I was just having a conversation yesterday on the airplane with a young man from South Africa about this, because of their cost of living and things are, and he lives in the UK now in London, but to buy a house there compared to what, I mean, it's astronomical. But even here, the way prices have increased, it's so hard for young people to be able to afford a house. I get that, but they have to find their own way. They can't stay in your house forever. They have to be able to get out on their own. And so but if you're paying their phone bill and you're
Mhm.
providing a phone for them, and you're giving them money, feeding them, and all of these things that they should be doing for themselves. If they're driving your car, you're paying their car insurance, things like that. You have to start, and you have to build the boundary muscle sometimes, because if you've been doing this for a while, to just say, okay,
Mhm.
we're going to stop doing all of those things and tell you to move out, that's kind of drastic. But maybe you start with something small and start just kind of gradually working in.
Right. Kind of easing your way into it. And I think that'll be good for
Yeah.
the child too. It won't be such of a
Yeah.
shock all at once.
And it really depends on the situation. If it's a crisis situation, it may need to be a little bit shocking, but yeah, you're right. It is,
Mhm.
for everybody involved, if you can start gradually move in.
So how did losing your son and watching him go through all this, how did that impact your faith in God?
I had a really solid foundation. My father was a Southern Baptist preacher, and I grew up in a preacher's home, being a preacher's kid in church all the time. But they also walk the walk. I got to see it in their
Mhm.
daily life. So I realized at a very early age that I was a sinner and that I needed a savior. And when I was 7 years old, I accepted Jesus into my life and was baptized. Obviously, my past